What's going on, people? Once again, it's another episode of Off the Line Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Eugene. I'm one of the hosts of the show. We made it. We're at the end. Congrats to those that won their championships this past week. I was fortunate to win both my matchups. I showed up in for the championship, so I'm happy to collect something back for all my endeavors for this fantasy season. We got Ike on the other hand. I know he might have a different tale, but we'll get to that in a second. You can find me on Twitter at Fantasy Jeans. That's GENES. You can find our official Twitter handle at OpTheLineFF. We're just gonna be chopping it up a little bit how the season went, just kind of a recap. Touch on a couple things that happened this past week. What happened throughout the fantasy football playoffs. Hopefully, we can talk about some things that might be useful for, if we do playoff fantasy football or getting ready for the next season. Or, if you're in Dynasty, we're still in the season. We're still grinding. So
the grind don't stop in Dynasty.
No, it sure don't. To the other host of the show, Ike, what's going on? How you feeling?
Good. I can be found on Twitter at just_Ike09. Yeah, as Gene mentioned, it was a bit of a different tale for me. Came up short in both of my fantasy championship matchups. Damn. And one of the teams had I played against Rashad Penny, who was the RB1 overall this week, and Ja'Marr Chase, who was the wide receiver 1 overall this week. So needless to say, got smashed, got flambéed. All that good stuff. So hopefully, second place is, you still get a little bit back, and then I had a couple of other leagues that I was in third place in. I think one gets money back, so it wasn't a total loss overall. But it was a fun and a chaotic season, and it sucks that we already at the end. We're already at the end. Time just flies.
It did. Time flies when you're having fun, man.
That's very true.
But I know one thing before we get into it. I know one thing that always didn't pop into my head until this morning was that all right, you win this money for your leagues or whatnot, but then you think if you break it down to the amount of hours that you spend on it, how much you made per hour, you're just I just work for crumbs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. You dedicate a lot of hours, doing all the research, doing the doing the EDU, looking through waiver wire columns, and just making sure you're on top of the game, ahead of your league mates, and at the end you don't really have too much to show for it. So, but I wouldn't change it for the world because I love fantasy football.
Wouldn't.
So that's all that matters. But speaking of players that just kind of balled out, Rashad Penny from the Seahawks, running back, came out of nowhere. 3 out of the last 4 games, he's had over 100 yards, and he was the number 1 overall running back on the week versus Detroit. So 25 for 170 and 2 touchdowns. He smashed. He won a lot of people some championships, a lot of people some trophies, some money. They just ran all over Detroit this week. And Rashad Penny, he was a league winner. I'm curious to see what they do with him in the offseason because he's been often injured, and this 3 years, nothing to show. And then most of this year, the vast majority of this year, he was on in and out of the lineups due to injuries, various lower body injuries like he's always had. And then finally there's a little small stretch at the end of the season where he just decides to just go nuclear. Basically, Seattle drafted him to be this guy, but where was it the first 3 weeks? The first 3 years of his career.
The ultimate game of patience with this one, man. Because sheesh.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was quite the surprise, quite a pleasant surprise for him balling. And speaking of surprises, it seems like every single week throughout the fantasy playoffs, we have surprise running backs that end up balling out. I think last week was Rex Burkhead and Justin Jackson. This week we had Boston Scott go for 14 carries of 47 yards and 2 touchdowns, and caught another 4 passes for 39 yards, and he was the RB4 overall. And that's in the absence of Miles Sanders, and Jordan Howard was kind of in and out of the lineup because he had a stinger.
Yeah.
So I think they'll ramp up his playing time, and we have a lot to say about Miles Sanders a little bit later on in the show. We'll save that one for you guys. And then another surprise at running back was Devin Singletary. He's kind of come on strong as of late, and he had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Falcons, and he finished as the RB5 on the week. And if you guys had the guts to start him, I mean, it was a pretty good matchup against the Falcons. I benched him in one league, but even then, it still wouldn't have mattered because that was the same team that was playing against Rashad Penny and Ja'Marr Chase.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't have ultimately it wouldn't have mattered for me to start him. But hey, if he started for you guys, and he paid a lot of dividends. And then lastly, we had Darryl Williams, the Chiefs. We've seen him step in before. He's been solid, filling in for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, various injuries, and he had 14 carries, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and he finished as the RB3 on the week. So I mean, these guys, they just seemingly came out of nowhere. But if you were kind of paying attention, you would know that Boston Scott was going to get some looks, and Darryl Williams was going to be the starting running back in a very high octane offense in Kansas City with Mahomes and Tyreek and Kelsey. So these surprise running backs continue to do it, and week in and week out, and that's pretty much been the theme throughout the fantasy playoffs. I mean, your studs, they've been hit or miss, right, for the most part. I mean, last week Jonathan Taylor didn't really do much, but then this week he kind of redeemed himself a little bit. But it wasn't really the Jonathan Taylor that we've seen over the previous 10, 11 weeks, where he was just on an absolute tear. Obviously Cooper Kupp, he remained doing his thing because death taxes and Cooper Kupp, right?
Basically.
But the most consistent part of the fantasy playoffs has been the surprise running backs. So these were the 3 that kind of stood out to me.
Yep. Another surprise was DK Metcalf. He's had a modest season this year. Some would say a little disappointing, but which is crazy because this dude, he still finished wide receiver 13 for the year. But this past Sunday, he went 6 for 63 and 3 touchdowns. Russell Wilson, he was cooking for whatever reason. I mean, it was Detroit, so
yeah.
He did manage to find DK pretty much single coverage every time when he needed a score. So I know some people were probably waiting or probably needed this for their championship, and I'm sure it was a great surprise to see DK with 3 touchdowns. So that was one surprise. Another surprise was again, this guy's been killing Amon-Ra St. Brown with Tony Plow, or however you say that backup's name.
David Blow.
David Blow. David
Bling,
Plow.
blow, blam, bing, bong, whatever his name is.
Whatever his name is, he kept finding him 8 for 111 and a touchdown, and he even had 2 rushes for 23 yards and another touchdown. Literally the only thing that was happening with Detroit this past week, and he did it wherever they needed him to. They had him everywhere, so it was definitely another surprise to see Amon do his thing versus Seattle.
Yeah, and just kind of continuing that theme of like surprises. A lot of star players, as I mentioned, a lot of studs, so to speak, didn't really show up for you in the fantasy playoffs or in this fantasy championship week. For instance, Stephon Diggs only 5 for 52. No touchdowns against the Falcons, and that's kind of been one of the ultimate smash spots of the year if you're playing the Falcons. But I'm not gonna put it all on him because Josh Allen was absolutely terrible in that game.
Yeah,
he only completed 11 of 26 passes and threw 3 interceptions.
But they were killing. They were killing on the ground. They just committed to run.
Yeah. The ground game was the focal point of that game plan for the Bills. It was snowing. It was inclement weather, but still, you still expect to see Diggs. If they're throwing that many times, you still at least expect Diggs to to produce a little bit more. I mean, hell, Josh Allen completed 11 passes and Diggs caught 5 of them. So it wasn't like he was targeted. Wasn't targeted a lot. He was
Mm-hmm.
targeted quite a bit. And speaking of targeted quite a bit, Tyrique Hill was targeted quite a bit by Mahomes this past Sunday, but only finished with 6 catches and 40 yards versus the Bengals. So that was a dud. And Tyreek Hill over the last couple of weeks has not produced anything for your fantasy squads since coming back from the COVID list, and I think that may have something to do with his lack of production. He was only 2 catches and 18 yards in the previous game, so that was pretty disappointing if you own Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs, especially this past week. They got you here to the end, to the very end. They let you down, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Another one was CD Lamb. I know a lot of people. I mean, this is a player that you never bench. You assume coming out from that Washington game that they would come out and do some more work against Arizona. But I mean, Arizona does have a formidable defense, and they kept him pretty quiet. He only had 3 for 51. Again, I mean, this is another prime receiver that people depended on. He's been kind of lackluster in the playoffs also. So I know that kind of sucked. I needed him in one league, but I mean, like I said, I thought I needed him. Obviously, I would assume so, but we still overcame his non-productivity. So another player that kind of didn't show up for you was Dalvin Cook. You would have thought 9 for 13, like bro, what is that? Like you're playing. I mean, you got a backup quarterback playing. Like why is he not getting touches? Like I don't like it didn't make sense. Like the game plan was terrible. I don't know what they were doing over there.
That's why they're not in the playoffs, and that's why Zimmer's on his way out.
Yeah.
And the Packers going into the game, they were 31st in rush DVOA, so they were getting run on. And they just came off a game where they gave up over 200 plus yards to the Browns on nearly 9 yards a carry.
Yeah,
and Minnesota's a pretty decent run team, and they didn't attack that or exploit that at all.
No,
so
and
now, granted, it's Sean Mannion, right? I mean, he's not going to threaten you. He's not going to threaten you through the air. So they probably loaded the box, but still you still have to figure out a way to kind of get Cook in space or do something to get one of your best players the ball, and they weren't doing that. They weren't doing that.
No,
they were just playing scared the whole time.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of. I mean I understand you do got the run that backup plan, but the Packers defense like the last 6-7 weeks they've been terrible. Like you could do anything against that defense. Like so I just didn't understand why they couldn't. I mean 9 for 13, bro. Like anybody could have did that. So
I think over the last 5 games going into this past one, they were giving up 29 points a game. So you could score on them. Like they were giving up a lot of points in that span. But it's just you can't you can't really expect too much from something called a Sean Mannion. So it's unfortunate.
And I mean, it's really unfortunate that if you saw just a side note, if you saw Zimmer's post game when they asked him about Kellen Mond, he's like, he said, we don't need to see him. I see him every day.
Yeah, the reporter kept asking him, so do you want to see Mond in week 18? He was like, no. And then there was an awkward silence.
Mm-hmm.
And then the reporter nervously asked again, it's like, well, why don't you want to see him? He was like, I see him every day.
With a stone cold face,
stone cold look, no facial expressions, nothing. So the fact that you guys watched, if you guys watched the game, you watched how bad Sean Mannion was, and it's an indictment on Kellen Mond that he can't be any better than that.
Yeah,
he must be stinking it up so bad in practice to the point where they can't even and they put him in the game for a couple of plays and they just yanked him right on out.
I missed that because I stopped watching, but
Yeah.
before halftime,
Yeah,
it
Mond
was
actually played a couple of snaps. He threw a couple of dump offs and had an incomplete pass. I guess he was under pressure, and then they're like, "Oh, we've seen enough." And
sheesh,
yeah,
sheesh.
I don't know, man. It's a weird situation there in Minnesota. So hopefully they clean house. And then speaking of Minnesota, just staying on Minnesota for one more second, Justin Jefferson, obviously with the backup quarterback change, or the quarterback change to the backup, he suffered. He suffered as well, and you couldn't really bench him. He did 6 for 58, not the Justin Jefferson standard. It could have been a better game, but unfortunately, with the backup quarterback, your ceiling and your floor will be limited and a lot lower than you have if you have the starting quarterback, Kirk Cousins. So that was just a bad showing overall from the Vikings offense as a whole. And then I think their best play of the night was a tip pass to the center, and he ran down
Yeah,
to the goal
yeah,
line or down inside the 5-yard line. That was their best pass, their best play of the
yeah,
game.
yeah. I did see that.
Yeah.
I know also one last part was Nick Chubb. I mean, that game was god awful. I don't know why Nick Chubb was in and out of the lineup. There was points in the game you're just seeing D'Ernest and just like nobody knew if Chubb was hurt or what was going on, but it was another dud that we saw from a stud that you probably were looking to get production from.
Yeah, and then four touches in the first half. And then
Yeah,
he was
I
getting
don't.
out-snapped by D'Ernest Johnson. Like, it just didn't make any
Yeah,
sense. And they weren't down by a ton, like,
no.
most of the game. So you could still run it, and the Steelers' run defense has been pretty bad. They're like bottom 5 in rush DVOA.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah. I
just
don't.
in these coaches, they like to overthink things, and oftentimes they're just on the wrong end of that. So it just, I don't know, man.
It didn't make
It
sense.
frustrates me. It frustrates me. I didn't have any Nick Chubb this year, but it frustrates me to no end that one of the best running backs in the league is you underutilized the way that he was, because that was just terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
and then
know, it's just, yeah. I don't know, man. I had no words. I was just watching the game, just like, oh, like what's going on? But
and lastly, just to touch on this really quick, DeAndre Swift was finally returned to the lineup from his shoulder injury that he sustained at Thanksgiving. And Dan Campbell in the media earlier this week basically gaslighted everybody, saying, "Oh yeah, we're ready to cut him loose. He's full go, blah 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 blah." And then he proceeds to give DeAndre Swift 6 touches. 6 touches. And one of those 6 touches went for a 31-yard run. I mean, like, you just, I again, like, it obviously I started Swift in the league, and he, obviously burned me. So it just I don't know. These things just, they shouldn't be happening.
Yeah,
They shouldn't be happening.
I'm
Your
sure a
best
lot of
player,
people.
your best player should
Yeah,
get the ball early and often. Anyway, what does Detroit have to lose? If he's
yeah. I
full
don't know.
go, feed him, hand him the ball, give him screen passes, do something.
Maybe they're saving them for next year. I don't know, but I know a lot of people got burned from that for sure.
Yeah.
But it's not the first time that you've heard Campbell say something and then the complete opposite happens on a Sunday. So
That's very true. That is very
yeah.
true.
All right, so we're doing things a little different. Like we said, we're recapping the season that was 2021. So we're gonna hit some MVPs and some other things that might have been touching points for the season. So our first one we wanted to
Wait, real quick.
yeah.
We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about
Oh
this
yeah,
duo,
you're right.
the
Yes.
Burrow and Chase duo that just
Yeah.
created some more magic this week. Joe Burrow just continuing on his ridiculous tear of phenomenal play, over 900 plus yards passing over the last 2 games. He had another 446 and 4 touchdowns against the Chiefs, and then Ja'Marr Chase. Like, what can you say? He broke Justin Jefferson's rookie record for receiving yards in a season. He broke the single game rookie record for receiving yards in a game. 11 for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was just like the Chiefs had no game plan whatsoever, and they singled him up time after time after time. And
Yeah.
I think he was targeted 12 times and caught 11 of them, and the only one that he didn't catch was an underthrown deep ball where he was open by like 2 or 3 steps.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that game could have been a lot bigger than what we
Yeah.
saw.
Yeah, but to be fair, it's not like are you gonna double him and then just leave T. Higgins single?
Well, I mean,
Like,
at some point though, like at early on in the game, he had 5 catches, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns. At
it's
that
true.
point, like you should
Yeah.
have, you should have adjusted on the fly as opposed to keeping him singled up. You're expecting, your corner that's been getting barbecued to, all of a sudden tighten up. That's not a strategy. Like
No.
you need to roll coverage that way and make the other guys beat you. If T Higgins is as talented, let him beat you. But Ja'Marr Chase was just going ape shit. Like he was open and early and often.
Yeah, and PFF had a stat where they said for the season he's had 872 yards versus single coverage, which is first in the league. And that was on full display because every time you see him jumping up, it was just one person with them, and they usually just didn't jump with them. So, you do have a point in terms of they should have did something, but fantasy owners, they loved the single coverage, which led to a bunch of points.
And in my demise in one league. So yeah,
Yes.
good job, Kansas City. Good job.
All right, so now let's talk
Yeah.
about fantasy MVP. I think we both had the same person, so go ahead. Let's dive into it.
Yeah, it's obvious. It's Cooper Kupp. He's the first wide receiver to go over 400 fantasy points, and on the season, he's has 138 catches, 1,829 yards, and 15 touchdowns. He's I think he needs 12 catches to break the single season receptions record. And I think how many yards does he need? Like 100 and let's say he needed 116 to maintain the season long pace. So I think he's like
You need like
126.
20 something. Yeah.
I think he needs 126 or 127 to break the yardage record. I think he may get the yardage record for sure. I think he might get both. I mean,
they're playing San Fran.
They're playing San Fran, and they have a
game they had to win.
They have to win. They have to win that game. Yeah, San Francisco does. I mean, the Rams are already in the playoffs, but if they want the division, they have to play all the way through. So I think he'll break that record. But Cooper Kupp has just been a stud all season. He was like one of the bigger steals of the draft. He was going in the 4th round. Robert Woods was going ahead of him. In terms of ADP, I think he was the wide receiver 18 in terms of ADP, and then Robert Woods was the wide receiver 14 in ADP. So it's just it's one of those things. You obviously you didn't expect him to dominate like he was, but he was just an incredible value. And hopefully you guys that took the chance to draft him are celebrating your championships.
Yeah, or you traded for him. I mean, I was one of those dudes that traded him away before the season started. I mean, I was on the Jalen Reagor train, so I definitely got hosed for that. But reward to the ones that had him on their teams. I mean, I would assume owners that had him on their squad, I would hope they made the playoffs for sure. But I mean, like we said before, this was a historic season for Cooper Kupp. I mean, he even came out and said that his stats shouldn't count in the record books, or they should start a new record book for games with 17 games instead of 16. I'm just like, no, because I mean, you're gonna do that for the 16 because it used to be 14 games. So you just accept it. You doing your thing now.
You're a stud.
Yeah, yeah. Don't be too humble.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't really need to say anything else. I mean, he's first in targets, first in catches, first in receiving touchdowns, first in receiving yards, number 1 in red zone targets, number 1 in yak, number 1 in dominator rating, dominator ratings, percentage of team reception yards and reception touchdowns. So, I mean, we don't need to go any further on that one, man.
Cooper Kupp, so unanimous fantasy MVP of the year.
Yeah, basically. All right, so we were also joint on this one, also fantasy bust. CMC, Christian McCaffrey, fantasy bust because he basically was the number one. He was ADP number one for redraft. He was debatable in terms of dynasty for in Superflex. He was probably top 3 for sure in all
At
drafts.
least top 3.
Yeah,
It
so
would go quarterback, CMC, quarterback, or quarterback,
yeah,
CMC, or
yeah,
sometimes CMC went first.
yeah. So I mean, he's only played 10 games in 2 years. So basically, since Matt Rule's been there, he's only had him for 10 games. Granted, he's done major work in those games, but I mean, one of the best assets in the fantasy game, or part of the formula, is being available. Like if you're not available, you're not even useful. And somebody's
Yeah.
using their first overall pick or your first round, and you only getting 4 games out of them. Like
Yeah.
you're not winning. Like I know I'm not the only one that drafted him first in, for instance, a redraft league. He was number one. I did not make the playoffs because I had a big ass hole at running back.
Yeah. And
So
he would pretty much take this take the slot of 2 running backs, because he was I think in 2019 he was obviously the number 1 overall running back. I think he was I want to say a
I
top
think he's top 10 wide
top
receiver
10
also.
receiver as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he
Yeah.
was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And then we may never see that level of production again from him, because the injuries are just continuing to pile up. It was hamstring, and it was thigh, it was ankle, it was shoulder, it was all these different lower body, all these various ailments. And I think I saw like a graphic a while back of it, just kind of showed like Christian McCaffrey's injury history. They showed one of those dummies, and it just had red everywhere.
It
It
looked
had
like a
red
game
all
of
red.
operation.
Yeah, one of the games of operation. It just had red, like on a lower body, it had red on his shoulder. So I'm curious to see where he goes next year in redrafts and dynasty startups. My guess, at least in redrafts, he's probably going to be taken the middle part of the first round, maybe towards the end of the first round. He'll be going at a discounted rate for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely.
He's not going to. I think the days of him being a number 1 overall are over, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think people have revisionist history. So even in like Dynasty Superflex, he'll probably be going in the second round, early mid second round for sure, depending on who you drafting with, for sure. So you're gonna get him at a discount now. That's gonna be relative to his availability, but I'm sure anybody with a right mind would definitely take a chance on him. Somebody with that type of potential fantasy pointage. So I wouldn't blame you. I know, and then probably a runner-up would be Saquon Barkley, because I know a lot of people were hyped up about him recovering from his ACL, and you saw the videos, he looked good, but when he came onto the field, he didn't look good. So
yeah, he had a couple of boom weeks. So the thing about Saquon is that the process was right in terms of picking him, especially like the late first round. And then from everything that the Giants were doing with him, was they were actually playing this perfect in terms of like just kind of ramping up his activity as the season progressed. Like he was gonna, I think at one point he was fully unlocked. He was the Saquon Barkley again. And then some freak accident against the Cowboys where Daniel Jones completely airmailed a slant, and Saquon Barkley obviously couldn't get it, and he stepped on somebody's ankle. And then since then, it just hasn't been the same. Nothing was the same after that. But I think at least like the first 5 or 6 weeks with Saquon, we started to see glimpses of what he was, or what he could have continued to be. But it's just I think his season was just kind of they robbed him of a season with that freak ankle injury, and he wasn't the same after that.
Yeah. All right. So the next one is a player you wished you had more exposure on your teams. Who you got for us?
I got Debo, man. I got Debo Samuel. I think this is kind of like a no-brainer to me. I was really, really big on Brandon Naiuk throughout the offseason, and I was drafting him in a lot of spots. And I just completely overlooked Deebo Samuel. I mean, I had him I had him over the last couple of years, and I saw that he was a baller. He was getting all these targets. The one thing that concerned me with him was just his target depth was, I think, a negative, but he was getting a lot of yak. He's getting a ton of yak, and a guy that gets a lot of yak is pretty useful for your fantasy squads. But ultimately, I overlooked him. And on the season now, he's the wide receiver 3, and the wide receiver 3 overall, and he was going in like the 7th round in most formats, 6th, 7th round in most formats. And he was drafted as basically like the wide receiver 36. And so it's one of those things that you wish you had. There's always that one player that you look back on and you're like, man, I had many many opportunities to draft him. I never pulled the trigger. I would always draft someone else in that slot. And, I deeply regretful for that.
Yeah, I also had Deebo as mine. Also, he was one of those players. Like, I was kind of scared because of like San Francisco's offense mixed with Naiuk like balling at the end of last year. So I just assumed that stuff was, and then you had Kittle, so I just assumed it would continue. I mean, Naiuk was going like his ADP was like wide receiver 2, while Samuel was borderline 3.
Yeah.
So, and like you said, he was just one of those players that just kind of overlooked, even though you knew the potential. Just you didn't think he was going to get the opportunities for somebody that was going to get drafted that high. I know one person that I also wanted to mention was Jalen Waddle. Like, just when you look at rookie wide receivers, you kind of I know at least for me, I'm not sure what others out there that are listening. Like, you're just kind of it's something new, so you're just not at like he was recovering from an ankle injury, and then he's kind of small build, and then he was going to the Dolphins. So you're just like, I don't know really how it's going to pan out. But I mean, I like the potential, and he was going cheap. I mean, people were projecting him to be like in dynasty rookie drafts, like mid first round, but there was a lot of places where he was going beginning or mid second round because the injury history mixed with being matched with the Dolphins. And I think for me, I know in my perspective, like I'm not always that eager to draft rookie wide receivers. I mean, and again, this is just another example of like these rookie wide receivers doing work, and they usually get work sooner than running back. So I know it's just maybe something people might be listening, and you might have to be a little more aggressive if you're playing in like dynasty startups where you have rookies mixed into your draft. So I just wanted to put that out there also. So I mean, Jalen was somebody I definitely wish I had a little bit more of on my squads.
Yeah, and just real quick on Jalen Waddle, there's a couple of things. Number one, you remember back in training camp where they were talking about whenever he was running and like some beat reporters and people who were on the sidelines watching training camp, they were saying that he was limping around and stuff like that. That was another thing that kind of just, suppressed his value a little bit more. Just pushed him down a little bit further, and which is really weird. I in the videos that I watched, like he was killing. He was running by folks. And just last thing on him, it's funny because I was doing a little research today on our next topic, and I stumbled across like going into Sunday's game, he had 96 catches, right? That is more than Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy combined. Like that. I mean, if you're a Broncos fan and Broncos pass catcher owner, that is depressing as hell. Depressing as hell. And those two guys are super talented, and a rookie consistent, ridiculously outperforming him. But that's neither here nor there though.
Yeah, that's true. And just one more thing about Jalen, they're using him how Landry was being used. Landry when he was with Miami, over 100 catches every year easy. And
he has 99 now.
Yeah, Jalen's about to do that. Yeah, and just think about this. Jalen's I think he's top 12 in targets. He has over 110 targets. So I don't know, it's crazy. So he's had a great year. Uh,
Yep.
so the next one is the player you waited on and they pissed down their leg. Shout out to Mr. Go Go 30 for the coining the piss down your leg say statement. So
Yeah.
my first one, or the one I have, is Allen Robinson. This was somebody that I was very high on. I had him on a lot of teams. Probably almost half my teams. I had some Allen Robinson. Um, Last year he finished wide receiver 9. Uh, this past draft he was top 11, top 12 wide receiver getting drafted. Redraft. I mean, it didn't matter where you were at. He was pretty much one of the first 12 getting drafted. If you didn't have rookies mixed into your uh, your drafts, if you did any dynasty superflex drafts. Uh, this year, like I said, he was drafted basically in the 3rd round. He was going to wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12. He played 11 games this year. You kind of just waited around thinking that it was going to turn around at some point. It never did. Gets hurt, comes back, still does nothing. He finishes the year at wide receiver 83 with 388 yards. That's 80. That's just under 81 points for the season with only 1 touchdown. Just think about it. Last year he had over 400 in the first 5 games with Mitch Trubisky or wherever you want to
Yeah.
call him.
Yeah.
And then also just another sad note, Calvin Ridley finished with 9 less points than he did, and Calvin Ridley played 5 games before he couldn't play anymore due to
That's
personal reasons. So that's just let you know how bad of a season Allen Robinson had. Might not be his fault completely because he had a rookie quarterback that he never got thrown to during training camp,
yeah.
and then you got the Red Rocket, so Mr. 2 yards per depth target. So
Yeah. The guy that I had was Jerry Jeudy of the Broncos. And I had him on quite a few leagues, and that's one of my many fantasy regrets. But he started out pretty hot in game 1. Had 6 catches for 72 yards, and we thought he was on his way to like another solid season. And that the proverbial year 2 breakout wide receiver, right?
Yep.
And then he hurt his ankle. He had a high ankle sprain. He was out for 6 weeks. Since returning from injury in week 7, he hasn't eclipsed 13 fantasy points like he did in week 1. He hasn't gotten over that amount. And he only has 51 total targets on the season, and he's the wide receiver 85. We expected Teddy Bridgewater to come in and make that passing game a little more competent than it has been in years past, but that clearly wasn't the case. He couldn't even get Cortland Sutton off the ground. Cortland Sutton, he had some good games early in the season, but by and large, disappointment. Jerry Jeudy had 112 targets last season, and just compared to the 51 that I just mentioned. So
Jesus.
it was all bad for him, and he hasn't been the same guy since coming back from that ankle injury. And he only has 2 top 20 finishes in his NFL career, and they both came last year. So that kind of gives you a glimpse as to how bad he's been. A lot of it is quarterback driven, and a lot of it is could be him, because he does have some drops as well. Does have some drop problems, and as evidence is he only has 437 yards on the season and no touchdowns. So Jerry Jeudy is definitely one guy that I held a roster spot for him for several weeks, thinking he's gonna come back and jump right back into a decent target share like he did in week 1. I was sadly mistaken.
Yeah.
Sadly mistaken.
Yeah.
But that's my guy right there that pissed down his leg when I needed him, and I think I started him in a semifinal, and he got 0 points on 4 targets, but I still somehow made it because my opponent just managed to be worse. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, and this is some. I held on too long. Like for Allen Robinson, I didn't I didn't let him go until they came back after bye. That's 11 weeks that I hold on to him, and he doesn't do any, like, he literally does nothing.
Yeah.
You're just holding out for hope. So, which is one thing that we've always talked about. Like, sometimes you gotta let go of the name and just look at the production.
Yep.
So yeah, it's bad. Just a side note question. So, will this deter you from drafting either one of these players next year if the opportunity arises itself
If the
because of
quarterback is
how you look?
I'm all in on all these pass catchers because the quarterback upgrades that that we're all thinking of. We can look at Aaron Rodgers, although I think it's likely that he stays in Green Bay based on how their season's going. Did see a
Yeah.
report yesterday saying that they're willing to work it out and they are going to franchise Davante Adams. So
Oh, shoot.
I feel like Green Bay is going to keep Aaron Rodgers, but a couple of names to keep an eye on are obviously Deshaun Watson. Hasn't played a snap for the Texans this year. He would be a great fit in that Broncos offense because the Broncos offense, they're just set up they just need a quarterback. They are the definition of a quarterback away. Their defense is solid. They have two pretty decent corners, and then they've invested a lot in their pass catchers, and they have Javonte Williams back there. I think Melvin Gordon's a free agent. They might bring him back. I'm not sure, but and he's played well this year. So
Yeah, he has.
I mean, that destination for any veteran quarterback that's an upgrade over Bridgewater and Drew Lock would be perfect. So yeah, I would be drafting these guys everywhere if the quarterback upgrades. But if it's the same quarterback situation, I want no parts of it.
Yeah, no sir.
No sir.
All right, so now we're gonna hit memorable fantasy performance. What was the one that stood out to you most, that you think some listeners would agree with? I know just before we came on, I know we went through some
Went through a
like
lot,
really
yeah.
good ones. It just sucks that we just want to go with one each. So what you got?
Yeah, so the one that stood out to me the most was Dalvin Cook's performance against the Steelers on Thursday Night Football in Week 14. He had 27 carries and 205 yards and 2 touchdowns. And just keep in mind, like, this was, he had just dislocated his shoulder, 11 days prior. So it was barely even 2 weeks that he had dislocated his shoulder. Starting that week off, like, he wasn't not expected to play. I think it was I think he was a long shot to play. And then Tuesday he returned to practice in a limited capacity. Wednesday he returned to he practiced again, took all the first team reps. And then Thursday morning you're hearing reports, well, Dalvin Cook may play, but his snaps will be limited. And then as close, and the game got closer and closer, they said, well, Dalvin Cook will play, and the expectation is that he'll have his full workload. And I'm like, what? How did the hell that?
Bruh, I remember
that?
The chats were going crazy when we heard that. I was like, wait, how?
I was like, how did it get to that fast? So then there was some context behind that. Was, the last time he dislocated his shoulder, it was like, I think it was like 2.5 weeks. I think he missed 2.5 weeks, and it was a playoff game where they played against the Saints. He had over 30 touches and over 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. So it's possible that he's been playing, apparently he's been playing with shoulder dislocations his entire football life. So he knows how to kind of deal with it and manage the pain. And then we kept seeing doctors on Twitter, some good, some bad, some in between, saying, hey, if he takes one hit, he's done. He might be out for the season. And then some were saying, oh, it's just a pain tolerance issue, and whatever the case may be. And then, he goes out and just destroys the Pittsburgh Steelers for 200 plus yards. Like, that was probably the most memorable performance for me. And it helped me in the multiple leagues. It propelled me into the playoffs in one, and then it got me a first round bye in another. So it was definitely one of those types of performances, just putting the team on his back.
Yeah. I had a lot, but for me, was the Jonathan Taylor versus Buffalo week 11, because this was, people were talking about, we don't think Jonathan Taylor's going to do anything because Buffalo's run defense was pretty good and this and that. I think Buffalo was like a I think they were a touchdown favorite, I think, in that game, if I remember
They
correctly.
were a touch. They were minus 6.5, 7,
Yeah,
7. I think 7.5. I believe.
yeah. And the Colts went to Buffalo and just busted their ass. This was a game that Carson Wentz was terrible. I mean, Josh Allen was worse. He kept throwing picks,
Mm-hmm.
and they just pretty much Jonathan Taylor just grinded to win out. He had four touchdowns.
Yeah,
Um,
5. He had five
oh
touchdowns.
yeah, five because he did have the receiving touchdown. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all on the road.
Yeah,
Um, he did have that long, like 40-yard touchdown run or 60 or whatever it was.
yeah,
Because I know in also during that time, I think he had the streak of 100 yards and a touchdown in like 8 straight games.
mm-hmm.
So that was historic. Um, and I think he had like almost 140 yards after contact in that game. Also, I know for me personally, I know that was one of the I had him in a 14 team dynasty league, and I needed that because I was like on the brink. I was teetering because on that squad I have him and CMC, and CMC's was done, so all I had was basically him, and I needed that win in like the next week or whatever. Otherwise, I didn't have a chance to make the playoffs.
You were
So
cooked.
yeah, definitely. So that definitely was memorable to me because that helped me. That propelled that started a winning streak for my team. So um, that one popped up to me right away.
Yeah,
But I know one that also I really wanted to put was the Lamar Jackson Monday night game that he had versus the Colts at home, where he torched them, and people,
yeah,
everybody just thought, okay, he's here, he's finally arrived in terms of throwing the ball.
yeah.
So,
He had like
but
over 400 yards and like 4 touchdowns,
yeah,
and
4 touchdowns, and
it was.
then
I
like
think. I
another.
think that game ended in overtime too. I think he had
Yeah,
the
it
walk off.
did.
I think
Yeah,
Marquise Brown or Mark Andrews. Like I know they both caught 2 touchdowns each in that game,
yeah,
and they both
yep,
went over 100 plus yards, and they both
yards,
had over
yep,
10 catches. So they both were just ridiculous. Like that
yeah,
was a perfect fantasy day if you had all 3 of them stacked in
yeah,
DFS or hell, maybe even have them all in the seasonal league. That was like literally the perfect storm that
yeah,
day.
definitely.
Yeah,
All right, the next one is the player you had the most exposure to across all your teams.
I'm gonna let you go first.
I had Calvin Ridley in 11 of my 18 leagues. Yeah.
Mm,
um, some of them were from previous teams, or some of them I already traded for, or I drafted him. Regardless, I was high on him because the previous season he finished wide receiver 5. Half the season, Julio either didn't play, or he played like a quarter and then he was hurt, and then it was just basically him. So, coming into the season, we're hyped up. Okay, we've seen him by himself, what he can do. Okay, now he gets a full season in this, and then now he's getting Kyle Pitts on top of that. So
yeah.
I'm just like, I'm hyped up. I'm like, yeah, okay, he's about to really do some work.
To
So
kinda draw coverage away from him and stuff,
yeah,
so he's not
yeah.
double
So
teamed.
yeah, so wherever like any like fresh draft that I had coming into this year, I targeted him. I was able to get him in a few of those. If I didn't, I already have him in previous years leagues that I already had going, and just I mean, we saw what happened. He was kind of all right, and then he had dealing with personal issues and never returned. So that was a hole that hurt me definitely in redraft, because one of the redraft leagues that we're both in, I had CMC 1, I had Calvin Ridley 2.
Yeah,
So and I managed to make it to basically where I needed to win and to get in, and I didn't win. So, I can definitely point directly to my first 2 picks not being there for me. So
yeah. And hopefully,
that is my
we haven't
player.
heard any updates on, the status of Calvin Ridley, but hopefully he's good and he's doing okay,
Yeah,
and,
man. Yeah.
anytime you have to take, time off to, get your mental right, you gotta do it, right? So,
Yeah.
we hope that he's good and he'll be back stronger than ever, next time
Yeah.
we see him on the field.
Yeah.
So the guy that I had the most exposure to was Miles Sanders, running back of the Eagles. I had him on just half of my teams, so but 8 out of 17 of my teams. Yeah, and I suffered greatly for those Miles Sanders shares. The week one he started out pretty well. He had over 100 total yards, just didn't get in the end zone, but he had a lot of touches. His snap share I think was or his running back rush share was like over 65%, which is good. Based on the Eagles' philosophy of running the ball. But it just went haywire after that. Currently he's the running back 40. He's missed some games due to injury. He's just been ineffective. He has no games of over 20 fantasy points on the season. And he's only giving you 3 weeks out of, I don't know how many games now we've gone, that he's played. I think 14 games, 13 games. 3 out of 14 games, he's only giving you he's giving you top 15 production. And one of those was a top 7 finish, a top 14 finish, and a top 12 finish. So outside of that, he's been pretty consistently bad throughout most of the season. And he was drafted as an RB20 and 39th overall, and that was kind of the 4th and 5th round range for the most part. So yeah, Miles Sanders was kind of like the guy that I had a lot of exposure to, and it wasn't even one of those things where I went into every draft targeting him. It was just the fact that where I drafted, he was just always available, especially when I've already snagged a couple of running backs, or I've already, I felt good about my running back core, but it's rare that you can get a starting running back that late, in the middle round, round 4 and 5. It's rare that you get a guy that, in an expected, run heavy scheme. He was just always there. So I would just smash the button because I was thinking I was getting a discount, or I was getting a value for him. And I was, again, sadly mistaken. Right. I was sadly mistaken. I was thinking he was just going to be, I have an anchor running back, and then I have a good, strong RB1 that's going to get touches, and then Miles Sanders is also going to get touches. So I was thinking my teams were kind of set up to smash, and that ultimately didn't happen, and he hurt me in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, I could definitely understand that. Miles Sanders, I mean, that offense was an enigma for a good portion of the year, and then once they started figuring out, he was hurt. So yeah, Miles Sanders. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. An honorable mention is Brandon Naiuk, but we kind of touched on the Naiuk and Samuel dichotomy earlier. I had a lot of Naiuk as well. I think probably he was my second highest owned player in leagues. I was smashing the draft button. I actually went into drafts thinking, okay, I'm gonna make sure I get this guy. He's gonna go off. Second year breakout. He got a lot of targets last year. He was balling, and I should have not overlooked Deebo Samuel, and that's what and that was one of my bigger regrets on the season.
Yeah. All right. So the last topic we have is the biggest lessons you learned from the 2021 season. We can alternate. I'll go first. My first one is if you draft the cuff, hold the cuff. So basically, if you're gonna go into a drafting the handcuff or the presumed handcuff of the starter, then you need to commit to the cuff. I mean, we can go back to the keeper league that we have. I drafted a couple of handcuffs, and I just, because I wasn't patient enough, I let them go, and literally next week they go off or they start getting a roll, and now you're down another running back. And these are running backs I would have been able to use, because if you're drafting CMC first, you're just thinking, okay, let me go wide receiver heavy now that I got this guaranteed running back that's probably going to be worth 1.5 running backs. So I know that's a strategy I had, and it didn't work out for me. So that's one that I can point to for sure.
One that I have is just not to trust all talented wide receivers with, especially if they're in shitty quarterback situations and they have shitty quarterbacks throwing them the ball. The most glaring examples I can point to are, Terry McLaurin in Washington. Because there was a point in time where Terry McLaurin would either go off or be complete dog shit.
Yeah.
From week to week. It was just literally the same. It was the same pattern, up and down, up and down, up and down. It was like a huge roller coaster. Like the volatility was just too much for me to, just to for me to wrap my head around. And you want receivers in more stable passing situations, and then another one that I can kind of pinpoint is DJ Moore in Carolina. He's he's a super talented cat. I mean, he's closing in on his third straight 1,100-yard receiving season, despite all the quarterback turmoil that's come his way. But I was faced with multiple decisions. I was faced with in drafts. This past summer, I was faced with either drafting DJ Moore or drafting the likes of Cooper Kupp or someone else. And I chose DJ Moore every time because I'm a believer in his talent. I'm a believer in his playmaking ability, because he's more explosive. He can get deeper down the field, and he has the better opportunity, or at least from my thinking, he had the better opportunity for more spike weeks. And based on what you were seeing in the preseason, he was getting targeted quite frequently. There's a couple of games here that they were playing. We were thinking Sam Darnold was going to be a different quarterback.
The first 4 weeks of the season,
Yeah, but no, I'm just even like preseason kind of gives you a little glimpse into what to expect a little bit. So I might have extrapolated that a little bit more than I should have. And drafting DJ Moore over Cooper Kupp in a lot of leagues, I think that kind of if I didn't do that, it would have probably changed the dynamics of a lot of the leagues that I ended up missing the playoffs in, or it would be the difference between no championships and maybe 4 championships, right? So because those were the two guys that I had always, because in mock drafts I do a lot of mocks throughout the year, or throughout the summer leading up to the main event drafts. And I drafted a lot of Cooper Kupp in my mocks. I was just kind of going back and forth and seeing how my teams look. And then when it came to game day, I would take DJ Moore for some reason. So, So just if they have immense talent, it's great, but just ensure that they're in more stable environments, more stable passing environments, because the Carolina Panthers passing environment has not been stable at all. DJ Moore has not had over 20 fantasy points since week 4. And it's just hasn't scored a touchdown since I think week 10 or 11. I think the first game Cam started, he scored a touchdown, but after that he hasn't had much. Cam has just been too erratic, and Sam Darnold has come in the last couple of weeks, has been much better. So it's one of those things. Just it's good to trust talented wide receivers, but primarily if they are in stable situations. So that's one of my takeaways, one of my lessons.
I know another one was to always be flexible, because I know this season, I mean, as this past 2 seasons dealing with COVID, you've had to bend a little bit, or you needed to make moves because of COVID. But in terms of anything that's happening, like seeing situations change, you need to be able to change with those situations that are happening within those players, with those teams, or even when you receive new information, being open to making moves. I know that was one thing that this year, I know for sure, with my dynasty leagues, that I wasn't as flexible as I needed to be in terms of making moves. And I know I paid for those. Like, I made the playoffs in a lot of these leagues, but it just flamed out because I wasn't flexible in terms of getting some more running back help, or trying to make a move to go get a young wide receiver for teams that were trying to make that playoff push. So just needed to be a little more flexible in the deal making process too.
Yeah.
So
and then the last one I have, well, it's kind of twofold, but it's kind of piggybacking off of the point that I just made, just not being beholden to starting certain players because of their talent. If there's a better matchup, like if you have somebody that's on the bench that's been balling over the last several weeks, if they have like a better matchup and they're going to be guaranteed targets, despite their lack of recognition, or it's not necessarily a household name or anything like that, I mean, don't hesitate to start those guys. And an example, I'll use DJ Moore as another example. I had him in the first round of the playoffs, going up against Buffalo, and obviously he got 10 targets. He had a pretty decent target share, but only 48 yards receiving. I could have played Russell Gage that week. He had a better matchup. He was getting targets. He had come on strong. I think he was like the wide receiver 8 in PPR over like the last like 6 weeks leading up to that week. That could have been an easy one for me to switch, and I would have probably won my matchup. I would have definitely won my matchup that week. So there's just small examples like that you just, if DJ Moore is going to be, in an unstable passing environment, going up against the Bills, they're arguably the toughest matchup for opposing wide receivers in fantasy. And again, an erratic quarterback play versus a more stable, pass catching environment and a better matchup. I would have to just side with the safer floor in that case. So just don't hesitate to bench some of those studs. I mean, they have, especially if they hadn't been performing like a stud over the last several weeks. And then and then my last thing, just kind of piggybacks off your point a little bit, just being more flexible, but hammer the waiver wire with authority, regardless of how good a shape your team is in, because as we've seen this year, COVID is a bitch. It is a big hairy bitch. It's gonna wreck you one way or another. And I didn't do enough of hammering the waiver wire, especially like I had several teams where I thought I was good and I had a lot of depth and I was cool with it, and I didn't really pay attention to the waiver wire in this league versus that league. Now some leagues I did this in, but other leagues where I wish I could have done it made the difference between making the playoffs and missing the playoffs, or winning a playoff game and losing a playoff game, or making a championship and not making it to a championship. So these, just making sure like you're consistent across all your leagues, despite how many, no matter how many leagues you're in. I'm in a lot of leagues. I admittedly did not devote the same energy to the waiver wire in all of them, thinking, I had this player, that player, this player, that player, thinking I was in good shape. But as we've seen, COVID ravaged a lot of rosters, and if you're not proactive on the waiver wire, if you're not looking ahead, it's gonna get you by a chokehold and take what it wants. So
yep, you're right about that. All right, this is the end of the show. Hopefully y'all stay with us to the end, talking through some of these lessons. And I know during the off season for sure we'll be touching on these in terms of how you can apply for getting ready for the next season. We at the end. We'll be back next week for sure. We're going to touch on props and playoff fantasy football specifically, since I know some people are definitely going to be indulging themselves in that. So we'll hit on that a little bit. Give y'all our takes and opinions about certain situations, and hopefully we can come out on the end of making some money. So Ike, you got anything else?
No, just just like Gene said, we'll have a more prop centric and prop focused show next week, just to discuss just fantasy, playoffs, those fantasy playoff challenges that you guys can dive into. We'll have different props that you can bet on and things of that nature, and some of our picks as well. But just follow Gene at Fantasy Genes, GENES. Follow me on Twitter at @just_Ike09, and follow the show at Off the Line FF. And subscribe, rate, and review. Look for us wherever all podcasts are found. We're found under Destination Devi. Hit that like and subscribe button. Check us out on YouTube. We appreciate you guys' time and rocking with us for the last 10 weeks since we've been doing this. So we're still relatively new, but we're getting better each and every day. But feel free to give us feedback and what you like about the show, what you don't like, what you want to see us improve on, things of that nature.
Yeah, I don't got nothing else to say. Ike said it all. So until next week, I know it's week 18. A lot of teams still got something to play for. So we can, we'll probably post some player props for y'all boys, just to see if we can dabble in some money. So until next week, y'all be safe. Don't get COVID. Peace out.
Yeah, peace.